Yeah, I think, what you just mentioned is the key is understanding the schedule really, how much time an athlete has to really prepare for their tournament schedule. If you're lucky, you can get 6 to 8 weeks. But as you know, and as a lot of coaches know, sometimes you only get 3, 4, or 5 weeks. And that first week or two sometimes can really be more so just recovering and taking care of any issues that might still be lingering, whether muscular issues or fatigue related issues. There's a lot of things that you need to kind of look at and make sure that you've handled before you really get into the prep work for the season. So, I think what's really important is getting on the same page with the coach and understanding how many weeks we have, actually how many training weeks we have after they've finished their season before they start that prep work. And so I try to get a minimum of 4 weeks. If we can get up to 8 weeks, I think that's great. And so, I think it really comes down to how you create that plan and how you create that progression in that time frame to make sure the athlete is peaking at the right time. And so, usually you'll spend a week or two. Again, this depends on how much time you have to start or to work with overall. Spend a week or two kind of in some aerobic activity, just some general prep. So I break it down into two phases. I look at what does the energy system need, and then what does the muscular system need. So those two are kind of my how I structure that time frame, and then I'll also put a movement focus once I communicate with the coach and figure out their specific patterns that athlete needs to focus on. So from an energy system standpoint, we'll go from aerobic, we'll go into lactic and alactic, and then we do some repeat sprintability, and then we'll try to peak. And then from a strength development standpoint, we'll kind of go GPP, and then I like to go through a little bit of a strength phase that's a little bit different. It kind of focuses more on the muscular contraction itself, looking at an eccentric phase, an isometric phase, and a concentric phase. And then we peak kind of the concentric to power. And so all of our movements are fast and explosive. And so I think if you take that time frame you have and you put it into a good schedule, you can really get them to peak at the right time. And so I think balancing the performance and the recovery comes down to how well you can actually create that peak. Because early on, you're going to have a little more volume. And then as you progress, that volume is going to kind of lower, hopefully. And then that intensity should be nice and high so they peak at the right time. And this is all while balancing just normal recovery protocols, foam rolling, stretching, mobility work, flexibility work, and anything that they're doing from a physical therapy standpoint or a chiropractic standpoint. You got to kind of balance all of that. And then after that, it's really just understanding the weekly layout between tennis and fitness. Are they hitting once a day? Are they hitting twice a day? Is there one day that they're going to be doing more drills versus match play? And just really understanding that intensity and how hard they're going on particular days. And then, we have to adjust accordingly. So we're not, doing too much too soon or too much too late even. Yeah, it's directly correlated. I think a lot of it comes down to creating good recovery protocols, good routines, good habits, whether that's proper warm up, proper cool down, understanding specific mobility and flexibility issues that are specific to that athlete. There's a lot of generic ones out there, but I think it's getting really specific and creating that individualized prescription. So it's a delicate balance of that throughout the whole process. But another thing is, I think that you can look at and be careful how much you go into it, but is understanding acute to chronic workload. Dr. Tim Gabbett has done a lot of research and kind of laid the groundwork for this, but it's understanding how much work they're doing initially compared to how much work they're doing ongoing. So a way to look at that is, let's say you have that athlete for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. You're going to look at the weekly rolling average of how many hours they're putting in, and you can do it from a tennis standpoint or a tennis and fitness standpoint. So let's say they're putting in 10 hours a week on average, just to use that number for an example. And they do that for 4 weeks straight. And then week 5, you jump up to 15 hours in that week. Well, that's a pretty significant jump. So if you divide those two, you kind of get 1.5, and that acute to chronic workload, that's a little bit high. You kind of want to be in that 0.85 to 1.3 range. That's kind of what Tim Gabb has laid out as a sweet spot. Once you get above that, where that time jumps so much in a week's time, then that's when you can have issues such as, overtraining or little nagging injuries that can pop back up, especially if there's specific mobility or flexibility issues or movement pattern issues that they've dealt with in the past. So I think understanding that acute to chronic workload is important. I don't think it's the end all be all, but I think it's something to definitely keep your mind on. Another concept that I heard a strength coach a long time ago talk about is filling the buckets. And so if you have one bucket that is stress on the body, so negative, and you have another bucket that's more positive, and think of it as maybe a recovery bucket, you want those buckets to try to balance out. So if this stress bucket is weighing everything down and you're not putting as much recovery into it, that can kind of get your body in a position where some of those injuries may come back up. So you think of, tennis is stress on the body, fitness is stress on the body, and you can think about mental stress or emotional stress as well. But then you got to look at how are we offsetting that through our nutrition, our hydration, our sleep, our recovery protocols, everything we're doing to take care of the body and kind of build that body back up so it's ready to perform and compete again. But I think all of it, if you structure the program right and you peak things properly, I think your strength and power will be there without the overtraining. It's just a matter of creating that structure that's specific for the athlete. Yeah, I mean that's the $1 million question, really, because every athlete is different. You have juniors that are just getting started and they're playing, level sixes and level fives, and they're trying to work their way up through the system. You've got high level juniors that are going and competing at, L1s, and then you've got players on tour who are just trying to break into higher rankings. And they're 500 or 250, and they're trying to work their way into the top 100. And then you've got, the top 50 in the world, and everybody's schedule is different. Everyone's needs are different from a structure standpoint. And so, you know, a lot of it is determining how much time we have to work with in regards to their fitness. And so, you're going to get times throughout the season and throughout the year where you have a good training block, a 4 to 6 week training block for a high level junior or a high level pro is very rare throughout the course of the year. But with a lot of the athletes that are not ranked that high or playing low level tournaments, you have more traditional training blocks where you can get 4 to 6 to even 8 weeks in. And one of the things that I communicate with all my athletes is, are we training to or are we training through? And so we sit down and we lay out their schedule and we look at their tournaments, and let's say we go 4 months, and a lot of times they don't know their schedule for 4 months, but we try to say, okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4 tournaments in these next 4 months that we're training to, meaning we need to peak and be as ready and as fresh as possible for these tournaments. We want everything to be ready to go at those tournaments. So we're playing our best. But we have 3 or 4 other tournaments that maybe not that they're not important, but they're not as important. And we're going to train through those. And so creating that schedule and understanding that schedule and making sure player, coach, and fitness coach are all on the same page is so incredibly important, and probably one of the most difficult things about training a tennis player. And so then really what you do is, or what I've done is I've created what I call a maintenance block. And so I have anywhere from 1 day to 10 days. And so if they're at a string of tournaments, and this maybe has more to do with some of the players on tour who are, top 200 or so, where they're traveling, they're on the road, and they're on the road for 2 to 3 or even 4 weeks at a time. Sometimes they go deep into a tournament, other times they're out first or second day, and a lot of times they'll find themselves with either 3 or 4, sometimes up to 10 days while they're on the road, not knowing exactly what to do or having a specific training program to follow. And so I've created basically maintenance blocks up to 10 days. And so, what we do is we go from, okay, day one, we're looking at, is that a travel day? We're going to make sure we're focusing on recovery, mobility, flexibility. And then we get into certain training qualities that we need to make sure we hit that are specific to that athlete. And so whether it's, speed or if it's strength, or if we need to have, if we have enough time and we need to focus on a little bit of some aerobic activity or some repeat sprint ability, we create that framework that's specific to their time frame. It's a little bit easier with juniors because they're with you and they're usually coming back to your location or your facility, and you can actually lay that schedule out and kind of be more hands-on. But if you're not working with juniors or working with athletes that are not with you, the communication is really, really key. So it's there's no right or wrong way to, well, I guess there are wrong ways to do it, but there are specific ways to do it. But I think it comes down to being as detail oriented with that athlete schedule as possible to create that layout.
And you mentioned the doing the tournaments and whatever. Is there any strategies that you use to maintain, especially the speed, the agility, and the explosiveness? Because again, strength might be easier. Even in a lot of places you can access the gyms or whatever. But for those ones, is there any strategies that you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maintenance is one of the most important parts of this because sometimes, well, a lot of times, this is such a long season, especially for the pros who are out on the road, traveling nonstop and unsure of what their schedule is based on, how they perform in different tournaments. But I think one of the most important things for strength coaches, it's helped me a lot, is really understanding residual training effects. So you look at basically a residual training effect is the amount of time that the training quality will last after you have stopped working on it. So what I mean by that is, let's say you do a strength block and you do a 4 week strength block, and you've actually created a good base level of strength. And whether you've gone into hypertrophy or power, whatever it may be, you've improved that quality and you've got that level of strength that you were looking for when you set out. The residual training effect means there's a certain amount of time that those qualities will maintain that level that you created before they slowly start to drop off. And it's not like you lose them immediately, but those effects will start to diminish over time. And so understanding that can really help you lay out your training while athletes are not with you or while athletes are traveling. So, for example, the residual training effect for strength is 30 days, plus or minus 5 days, but you're looking anywhere from 25 to 30 days, 25 to 35 days that you have established a base of strength. That base of strength is going to last that amount of time before it slowly starts to diminish, which is good. So we know if we've gone 25 or 30 days and we haven't done any strength training, we need to make sure that we're incorporating some maintenance lift or even some lifts that are going to increase that foundation, so we don't really significantly lose any of that. Your oxidative or your aerobic system has the same thing. It's about 30 days. The one that I focus on the most because it's the shortest residual training effect is speed. So looking at your phosphagen system or alactic or your ATP creatine phosphate system, that really is only 5 days, which is not a lot of time. I mean, there's a plus or minus three that the research shows to put on. So you can look at anywhere from 2 to 8 days. But essentially, that means if you go more than 8 days without working on speed or just pure all out intensity, max velocity, then those training qualities will start to diminish. Now, here's the thing that you have to keep in mind is they're also competing at this time. So when you look at speed and different energy systems, they're probably getting some of those elements at least once or twice a week in their matches. Pure speed, maybe, you got to look at what type of player they are and their game style, but they're probably hitting all three of their energy systems. So those are not necessarily being developed, but you're not losing those effects, in my opinion, unless you have a long time off. But the strength, if you're going more than 30 days, then you need to start to look at how we can start to implement that back into the system, back into your program before you, or back into your schedule before you start losing some of those strength base levels. Yeah, I mean, constant communication is key. I mean, if you're trying to make sure we're monitoring, their readiness or their fatigue, especially when they're not with you, I think that communication is so important. There's other tools that you can use that we've used in the past. Heart rate variability is definitely one of them. Kind of looks at how your body is in, whether it's in a sympathetic or parasympathetic state. So it's looking at your nervous system. You have to be careful with that a little bit because basically you just take a heart rate measurement every morning in a rested state, and it's looking at it's trying to diagnose if your body's in a sympathetic, was think of that maybe more relaxed versus, or excuse me, parasympathetic more relaxed, sympathetic is more go, 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 go. It's kind of your fight or flight type of scenario, but it's looking at understanding what your nervous system is doing. And ideally, you want to be a little bit more parasympathetic at certain times. But when you're looking at heart rate variability, it's going to give you a score in the morning. And it's basically going to be kind of a color, a green, an amber, or a red. And red means that maybe you're too much in a sympathetic state or your body's not recovered enough. And so you can create some recovery protocols based off of that. You got to be careful with that a little bit because I think it can have a effect on the mentality of the athlete or the player when they're on the road. Because if you wake up and you check out your heart variability and it says red and you need to focus on recovery, I think that can affect the mindset a little bit of the athlete thinking, oh, shoot, I'm not ready to go. But that's something that you can do. I like to do it more so when they're with me so we can make those adjustments together and it doesn't necessarily affect them from a mentality standpoint. So that's something that I think you can look at to understand their readiness. There's different RPE methods where they can rate themselves in the mornings and things like that. One of the things I like to do is from a fatigue standpoint, that's very hard to monitor. There's a lot of self-assessments out there, but I like to do a biometric method of training when they're with me or even when they're not with me. And essentially what that is you're taking percentages of drop off in their performance. So if you're doing weight room activities, if you're doing a certain strength movement, you're going to do that a particular weight for a certain amount of time or for a certain number of reps. And you're going to, let's say you do, how long does it take you to do 8 reps, right? You're going to time that. And as soon as you get to a point where that amount of time it takes you to do those reps drops off by 3% or 5%, or whatever percentage you determine ahead of time, we're going to stop because we understand that our body is getting a little bit too fatigued. And if we were to keep pushing, it might drive us a little bit more into that fatigue and we may not be ready to perform. Um, and so that's a very easy method to utilize, and it's direct feedback to the athlete. They can do that on their own once they understand how to put that together. And so that's one method I've used to make sure that we're not overdoing it. Because again, when they're on the road, they're not with you. It's you're just taking their word of, oh, I feel great, or I'm a little bit tired today. But there's so many other variables and factors that can go into that from sleep and hydration and everything like that. So if we truly know how their nervous system is performing and how they are doing the work, then we can have a much better picture into how ready they are, how fatigued they are. The last thing I'll look at sometimes is if they've been away from me for a little while, I'll look at their resting heart rate or even their heart rate reserve, which is your max heart rate minus your resting heart rate. And I'm seeing if that's fluctuating or changing at all. And if that resting heart rate has gone up a significant amount over a course of a few weeks or so, then we might look at some recovery protocols to make sure we're not inducing too much fatigue. Yeah, I mean, understanding um, their injuries or their preparedness, or I think it comes down to the patterns and the habits we've put in place. Honestly, it's that shouldn't necessarily be a concern unless something significant happens, in my opinion. I mean, maybe we roll an ankle or we tweak a muscle or something like that. But I think if you've done the work and you have the communication with the athlete, I think those systems should be in place. If you have the ability to, and if an athlete has an ability to come see me in person, usually what I do is a full assessment because I really want to know what could be the issues that they see, when they're not with me or when they're at a tournament. So we'll go through an entire assessment protocol where we go through just functional movement patterns. We look at how they hinge, how they lunge, how they squat bilaterally, how they squat unilaterally. I mean, just any movement pattern that is specific to them as a tennis player. We'll look at their mobility, the range of motion that they have at particular joints. We'll look at their flexibility within particular muscle groups, and really try to go joint by joint. Ankle, hip, back for sure. Obviously, shoulder, knees. You're looking at all the joints, understanding what issues they've had in the past. Is there injury history that they're dealing with? And then once we kind of lay out everything that they've gone through in the past from injury history and what they're dealing with, then we'll look at what their restrictions are, what issues could become problems later, and then we try to create a corrective exercise protocol. So essentially, we're going to have specific movements or specific exercises that they're going to do They could be mobility based, soft tissue work, foam rolling. They could be flexibility based, stretching, different types of stretching protocols, or they could even be movement pattern based or muscular activation based. And we're going to create that specific protocol for that athlete. So that should become, after we do 2 or 3 days of assessments, that should become routine. That should become pattern. Those may be integrated into their warm ups, integrated into their cool downs, integrated to their nightly routine before they go to bed, or integrated to their morning routine once they get up. Those should be so ingrained in that athlete that if something does come up while they're training, or while they're playing and competing, they know exactly what to do. And now we still communicate with them. We still make sure that they can ask all the questions they need to and have a full understanding of what they're dealing with. But I think that comes down to, understanding the athlete at the most basic level, from a physical standpoint, and then creating those patterns and habits. And then ideally, if you do that, you don't have to, you know, worry about that when they're on the road.
Last question. One thing that with Mark, it was clear since the beginning when we started doing these things that we wanted to address the different ages levels, females, males, juniors, pros. Is there anything that you would say, even the adults here, especially in Atlanta with the Altas and whatever, is there anything that you would say it's different or specific for a specific group, or you would say it's more or less the same for every?
Yeah, I mean, there's differences in every athlete, every group of athletes, adults to juniors to high level players and players on tour. Um, it's relatively difficult to, I think, group them, separate them, and say they each have different needs. I think the sport has specific demands, and so what you're trying to do is match the demands of the sport with the style of the player and figure out what's missing, and then kind of create that bridge so they can enhance those abilities. And it's challenging. I think, Dom mentioned the other day, the adult players, they want to do the same thing or have the ability to do the same thing the junior players or the high level players are doing. And I think that holds true for the younger players. They really look up and emulate the professional players, and they want to be able to do those same things as well. I think the hardest part with that is, especially for a lot of the junior players, they see this player, that player doing these crazy workouts or amazing workouts or unique workouts, or different training strategies, and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to do that." You know, but I think with social media and everything we see, it's easy to be enamored with that and be like, well, I should be doing that. Or mom and dad are like, you should be doing this. Why aren't you doing those types of things? And so to me, it's a big educational process. You have to really understand we are creating a foundation. If you're 10, 11, 12 years old, I would love for you to be the best possible tennis player right now. But there's probably a lot of physical qualities that we need to improve or address before you are the best version of yourself. And so, when I'm talking to players or parents or coaches, my communication is, I want to create them to be the best possible athlete at the right time. And to do that, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be doing, you know, all these crazy activities that you've seen. We're going to be doing some basic stuff to start. We're going to create this foundation that we can build off of. And so, you know, with that though, there's a mindset that the athletes, whether you're adult or junior or a pro, I think there's a mindset that they have to adapt, and that is it's a process. I want you to be a process oriented athlete. I want your mindset to be process oriented, not so much results oriented. I understand we want to win every tournament we play, we want to win every match we play, but there's specific tournaments where, okay, I mean, I really got to win this high level tournament, but there's other tournaments where, okay, this is a process. I understand that I may not do as well this tournament, or maybe my training hasn't got me to the point where I want it to, but it's a process. We're laying this foundation. We're creating layers of different training qualities that we're going to develop over time. And so if the athletes can have that process oriented mindset, I think that helps a lot, because there's a lot of information out there, some good, some bad, and you can find information to support whatever belief you have or want to have, whether it's right or wrong. And so I think making sure that we create that foundation is very, very important. And then I think one of the other things we got to do is we got to make sure that they're staying mentally fresh, because this can be a mundane, monotonous sport at times. I mean, you're coming out here and it's day after day after day. Some of these kids spend 15, 18, 20 hours a week on court, which is fine if they've worked up to that. But mentally, that can be a lot, and that can be taxing. And that doesn't take in all the other pressures from mom and dad and coach and school and life itself. And so understanding that mentally that's a lot on an athlete, especially these young athletes. I think you really got to do a good job of building that relationship with the athlete, making sure that they know that you are there for them, whether they win or lose, and just helping them understand that this is a process, and they're gonna learn from fitness development and tests. They're gonna learn a lot of things through this process that are going to help them become better people in life. But when I see athletes get so focused and so bent out of shape on losing a particular match, or how they played in front of certain people that maybe have an opinion that they value, I think we got to sometimes step back a little bit, make sure we're taking care of the whole athlete, and help them know that they're loved, and we care for them.